Hello, everybody. Uh, Welcome to our new series called Words Matter. For those of you who don't know, my name is Anthony, and myself, I don't hear myself talking back. I am so excited to be starting this new series. It is going to be a ton of fun. I'm doing 8 series for homeowners policies, and then we're going to shift into business policies and commercial policies to talk about those. But this whole series is going to be focused on really diving deep into policy interpretation and policy language and talking about what's covered, what's not, use lots of examples from different carriers across the board and really try to get a deep understanding of what an insurance policy actually covers and doesn't cover. And the reason this is so important for everybody in the industry, candidly, it's even really important for IAs and in-house adjusters for carriers, so that you actually know what this policy says. It's not just what you might think or what you might be hearing in the streets as to what's covered and not covered, colloquial terms that might come up that aren't actually part of the policy language. And you need to know this because you need to know what you're arguing with and what you're using as part of your job, again, on both sides of the aisle, so that you know exactly what you're supposed to be arguing. When it comes to the policy language, this is a contract. It is an agreement between two parties as to what is to happen, and those words really do matter. So hopefully you will all gain a lot from this series and will stick around to hear. Any questions you guys have, please let me know right in the chat. The chat is live right now. I will be able to respond and make things pop up. Joe's comment, for example, just that he's listening from northern New Jersey. I can pop them up on the screen and respond in time to your questions, assuming we're not overwhelmed with too many. I also addressed questions at the very end that were emailed to me when people registered. So when you registered for this, you had an opportunity to ask a question. Some of them have to do with this topic, and some of them don't. I make it a point to make sure I address every single question that comes in. So even if it's not related to the topic, I will still be addressing those. And I want to stress it's actually really valuable from what I'm told to stay and listen to those questions, because a lot of times the questions that one person has in this industry comes up through a lot of other people in the industry as well. So if you're able to stick around all the way to the end, please do. We've got a lot to fit in for this first talk in this Words Matter series. We're going to be talking about the declarations pages, the definitions, introductions to the policy, and the grants of coverage. It's a lot to fit in what I hope will be about an hour. But I'm happy to stop and answer those questions as we're going through. So please do not hold back. Let's get this up on the screen now. For those who don't know, like I said, my name is Tony DiUlio. On the screen right now is my contact information. That is my personal cell phone. That you can reach that morning, evenings, weekends, whenever you would like. I might not always pick up, not because I don't want to hear from you, but because something else might be going on. I might be in court. I might be with my family. Whatever the case may be, but I will get back to you. You also are granted a permission from me when I give you this phone number, and that is you're allowed to bug me. I might be in trial for a week, and uh, I might overlook a text message or a phone call from you. It happens. We are all human. I'm trying very hard to get better at it, but it does happen. But that doesn't mean you don't have to follow up again, or you don't need to follow up again, or you're not allowed to follow up. Please do. I don't mind if you text me one day and say, "Hey, Tony, give me a call in this case," and then shoot me another text the next day or the day after that saying, "Hey, I haven't heard from you yet." It's perfectly fine. Please feel free to reach out with any questions you might have or any assistance that you might need on a file. One other announcement. I'm very, very excited to announce that we have set up our PAGPS conference for 2023. Yay! For those of you who attended PAGPS, which is the Public Adjusters Greater Philadelphia Summit, it was a huge, huge success last year. We held it right in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, just a couple minutes from the Philadelphia airport. We had over 125 adjusters attend. The courses were, in my opinion, top of the line. And I'm not saying that just because I got to teach some of them. I mean, we had people, some of the best in the entire country, come and talk and teach things like Exactimate, the new technology for roofing. We are finalizing our schedule right now for speakers, but we've already got some really great classes lined up. So I would stress for anybody who is interested, head over to pagps2023.com and get registered. It is there is a potential to run out of space for the spot we used in Cherry Hill. It is not unlimited. So to the extent that you want to get signed up early and reserve that spot, I highly recommend doing that, because again, with 125 last year, we expect similar numbers or more this year. And if it gets too big, we will have to start closing the doors. So head on over and do that as soon as you can. So let's jump in. This is the Words Matters series. Again, we are focusing on the language of the insurance policy. For those of you who don't know, because this is a contract, it is incredibly important for you to actually read the words that are in the policy. The last series that I had done was the Perfect Claim series. If you didn't watch it, I highly suggest that you do. It goes all the way from starting your firm and setting up your systems, all the way through closing a file with either full payment or you've got problems and what do. It was 12 parts, and I had a disclaimer that not all claims are perfect. And here I want to make another disclaimer. Not all policies are the same. I, in no scenario, will be able to go over every single policy and every single piece of policy language that exists out there. Obviously, that would be ridiculous. So it's really important to read the policy. There's a great book out there called When Words Collide. And if you ever read it, you'll see the phrase RTFP, and it's read the effing policy. And there's a dispute as to what the F stands for, whether it is read the full policy, which would make a lot of sense, or just read the fucking policy. Either way that you take it, do it. Just read the policy. It is incredibly important. Here we're going to go over a few things, specifically the declarations pages and the information you can get through that. We're going to talk about the definitions section of the policy that is usually going to be one of the first sections of a policy when you get it. And we're going to talk about the grants of coverage, what it really means to be insured under these policies, and how to use all of this language to benefit yourselves during the adjustment process. All right. So a few little background facts, and I've given these before, but I wanted to put it in this series as well because it obviously applies and is important. The NAIC in 1993 came out with this concept of the Property and Casualty Policy Simplification Act. And the idea was, hey, let's make these policies easy enough so that people can read it and understand what it actually means. As you can imagine, this was a huge flop. It didn't work. And there was a study done under this Flesch scale about the readability of a document. It's on this scale of 1 to 100. And the higher the number, the easier it is to understand. So imagine, some Dr. Seuss book is a 99, a 98 on the list. The Bible was a 66 on the Flesch scale. Einstein's theory of relativity was a 17.72, and the average insurance policy was a 10.31 when it comes to the readability of that document. I mean, that is unbelievable when it comes to how difficult it really is to understand these. But us, as professionals in this industry, are certainly expected to have some elevated knowledge when it comes to that, and hopefully you will gain that knowledge by watching some of these series. I hate to break it to you. This is going to be tough, I know, but size matters. It really does. And when you're reviewing insurance policies, it is also important. And the reason it's so important is because so often when we ask for an insurance policy from an insurance carrier or an agent or a client, they give you 15, 20 pages, and they think that that is the policy. Even insurance agents, when you ask for a policy, actual insurance professionals say, hey, can you send me the whole policy, the full policy? Sure, no problem. Here it is. And they send it to you, and it's that limited number of pages. It's probably not the full policy. You need to recognize that the average insurance policy, the average HO3, I looked at 14 carriers, I did this math myself, 70 pages for an HO3 policy. That was the average out of the top 14 carriers in the country. So when you are asking for a policy, make sure you're actually getting the whole thing. I'm going to show you how you know whether or not you did get it. All right, I want to dive into what actually matters for this stuff when it comes to the information we're going over. And the first thing I want to talk to you about are the declarations pages. Now, the deck pages are really, really important, and they are so often glanced over for really quick information that the adjuster thinks is the only thing that matters. Right? What are the policy limits? All right, I care. Everybody cares about the policy limits, and they look at it and they move on. Okay, but there's so much more information in there. And there's actually information that you can use to help argue your cases to a better level of success. So it's really important that you understand what information can be contained in there, to read it and to use it when you need to. Now, I want to stress some of the things we're going to look over when it comes to examples. They don't exist in every policy. I'm not telling you this is going to work every single time. What I'm telling you is it can work sometimes. And even if it only works 10%, 20%, 30% of the time, it's still worth making those arguments because you're being more successful on those claims moving forward. The deck page contains some really critical information. I've put the list here, but it gives you the named insured. That might sound like it's insignificant, but it's incredibly important when you are signing a claim up. You want to make sure you have the proper person signing up for a claim that actually has the authority and is bound by this policy. So, a great example, a husband and a wife. Some policies may only have one or the other spouse. Perhaps this was the wife's home before the marriage and they never switched the policy over, and she is the only named insured on that policy. Well, if you meet with the husband at the property and make assumptions regarding his ownership and interest in the policy, in the property and the policy, maybe you sign him up as the representative with the public adjuster contract. Well, that's not going to be sufficient. You need to get the wife to sign up as she is the named insured on the policy. This is also really important when it comes to things like representing businesses or condo associations. You need to make sure that whoever is signing that contract has the authority to be doing so on behalf of that organization. You also can get the mailing address from the declarations page. All right, well, why the hell does anybody give a crap about the declarations page? Or I'm sorry, about the mailing address. This comes up a lot in claims of residency issue. Let me give you a quick example. You've got an insured who has an HO3 policy on a property that used to be their home, but they moved out. They moved out 3 years ago and they bought another property who's also insured with, let's say, Allstate. So both properties are insured by Allstate. Both properties have an HO3. Both policies have a mailing address that is proper, the actual new home of the insured. Well, all of a sudden, when Allstate comes back and says, hold on, Jane Doe, you weren't living here. This isn't your residence premises. You don't have coverage. You can say to Allstate, well, hold on, Allstate. One of the many ways, and we can talk about the others, one of the many ways that you knew I wasn't living here was you had my mailing address. And for 3 years, you've accepted my premiums knowing you had my home address and didn't change the policy. That's on you. That's not on me. I told you I moved. I gave you a new address. You didn't change the policy. This is now your fault, not my fault. Now, there's a number of other reasons that that claim could still be covered. So if you're dealing with residency premises denials, let me know, and I can give you a lot of the tricks to make sure that that is covered. I use the word tricks, by the way. They're not tricks. It's understanding the policy to know they're covered. But that's one of the great things that you can get from the declarations page. That also gives you the insured address. Again, why is this a big deal? In a lot of cases, it might not be, right? This is someone's home. It's the mailing address is the same as the insured address. Nobody gives a crap. Fine. But sometimes it does matter. And I've got a case right now going forward where there is a mailing or an insured address on the property, on the policy. And the policy only lists that one address as the insured address. Okay, what's the big deal? There's 3 buildings on that property. One is a commercial restaurant. One is a rented out to others, and the third is a storage area. Now, the question is, which building is actually covered on when it says the property at that address? Which one is it? Well, the carrier seems to believe that it coincidentally is the property that wasn't damaged. Our claim is, sorry, you listed that property without any distinctions as to which one is the covered building. So we've got coverage under all of them. It can be really useful to recognize that's in there. Obviously, we talked about the limits. Everyone recognizes the importance of the limits within the policy. But number 5, I have in bold and red, it's the forms. When I say forms, I'm talking about all of the attached forms that go with that policy. The declaration page is not the insurance policy. That's not the contract. It's simply outlining what's in the contract. So the contract itself also consists of the forms that make up the insurance policy. When you take a look at that list, and we'll take a look in a moment, that's going to be how you know whether or not you've got all of the pages for this insurance policy. Also, in the declarations, you might get conflicting information. And that's really valuable stuff because there are some carriers out there who put summaries of coverage on their declarations page. If I could give one piece of advice to insurance companies, if anyone happens to watch this from an insurance company, take that out. Putting a summary of coverages in the declaration page is creating nothing but trouble for you because it is so rarely consistent with what is actually in the policy. By way of example, there's a carrier who has it listed that the policy doesn't or covers water damage, because certainly there are aspects of water damage that is covered, but it doesn't cover mold and fungus. Well, that would be great, except water damage is a complex issue within the policy as to what's covered and what's not covered. And there also happened to be an endorsement on the policy to cover mold and fungus. So you get these conflicts because of base language that is contained within the declaration page and policy that don't work together. It's nice for our sake because when it creates any level of ambiguity, that ambiguity must be read in our favor, our being the policyholder's favor. So you can use that information to say, wait a second, farmers, you sent me a declaration and a renewal package to my insured for 10 years, and that said they are covered for these items. And now you're saying they're not? You can't do that. And that argument has been successful in litigation with the courts supporting our position. Obviously, the deck page also contains your deductible. And again, not usually an issue until you get to things like wind deductibles, hurricane deductibles, named storm deductibles. All right, well, we've got a named storm. Who has to name it? What if it's colloquially named by the state as some storm because of what happened? Is that enough? Does it have to be named by NOAA? Or what about if the news network happens to name it? Where's the line? What does it really mean to be a wind deductible? The windstorm knocked a tree into my house. Is that wind damage? Is that impact damage from the tree? Which deductible would apply? So you can you have these issues that are created as a result of broad language within a policy that the carrier can't really support without really taking the narrowest possible interpretation. So I told everybody as I was putting these together that I wanted to give examples. I'm going to make myself a little bit smaller here to try to do my best, although candidly that doesn't do the greatest job of making it any bigger here. Hopefully when it's full on your screen, you can see some aspects of this, but this is an example of a farmer's declaration page, the first page of the deck pages. Now, when I say deck pages, which by the way, DEC, not DECK, because it's short for declarations, the deck pages are rarely one page. Oh, actually, I can't think of one that is just one page. So make sure you've got that full set when you ask for it from the client. But these declaration pages have some important information, as we've discussed, and I want to show you some of the examples. So this is the second page of the declarations, and there is actually some really important information here because we've got the property that is insured, and we have the, I apologize, I actually can't even see what my own, the summary of coverages, or summary of changes. Changes within a policy are really important because the carrier can't unilaterally reduce coverage within a policy. So if they are starting to add an endorsement that reduces coverage, they're going to have a really hard time doing that in a renewal under most state laws that don't allow them to do that. So talk to your client about that. Review that section and see if that is something that is able to be discussed if they approved it or not, if they were okay with those changes when it came through. We keep going. I'm going to use farmers for one example. I'm switching to another carrier. We get to another page of the declarations. Okay, everybody sees this. We've got some property coverages. We've got some descriptions of property. What's really important? Who cares about these pages? Well, it's really valuable because we've got more information about mailing addresses and insured locations up here, up on the top left. And we've got the property coverages themselves finally outlined. We're now on page 3 of the declarations before we get that. This information can really stand out and make a difference when you are arguing with the carrier to recognize things like, all right, our coverage A limit might be 260, but we've also got this extended replacement cost. There's more coverage there that is available under a lot of these policies. And we know that by looking at the declaration pages. We know that the coverages for coverage C and coverage D contained within the policy, whether it's a coverage amount or a time limit on coverage D by way of example. This is all really important when it comes to how much you can argue for. I also wanted to point something out when it comes to the policy. And up in that top left corner, it says who it's underwritten by. It's blacked out just a little bit on the top because of the redaction, but it says Truck Insurance Exchange. But the policy says Farmers Insurance up top. Well, Farmers, like a lot of carriers, is smart. They underwrite the policy under a different name versus what they market the policy under. You might ask, why the heck does that matter? Well, when I have to file suit, I have to file suit against who underwrote the policy. So, for example, it's Truck Insurance Exchange. I'm not suing Farmers Insurance. Again, you might ask why that matters. Well, when someone looks up Farmers lawsuits, they're not going to come up with nearly as many because I'm suing Truck Insurance Exchange instead of Farmers Insurance. I mean, it's a genius idea. And obviously, a lot of carriers and companies have done this. But that's why it's so important as to this information. We get onto the next page for the declarations. And again, we've got some really important information. We've got additional coverage options under the policy. This section is so important because it could tell us two things. It might tell us what's actually included on this policy as an option that's been selected, or it could tell us, oh, these are options that you didn't select under the policy. So you want to make sure that you're reviewing this section to know what additional things do we have. One of the top questions I got this time around was all about ordinance and law coverage. And I think I actually needed to do a whole class. If you would think that that would be beneficial, let me know in the comments, just so I can get a good sense that people really do care about a dive into understanding ordinance and law coverage. But I think I might need to do a class on that as well. But this tells us, okay, well, we've got some additional coverages here for ordinance and law. We've got some additional coverages for limited matching, for siding and roofing materials. All of these are part of the policy, and we know it from this section. We've also got the deductible. And now we get into a section about how we settle for a covered loss. This is somewhat unique to Farmers. There's not a ton of carriers that have that. But the section is unique because it conflicts with what the policy itself says. As you can see, taking a look down this list, it says replacement cost, replacement cost, replacement cost. Fantastic. As a homeowner, and I see this and I get it, I'm good. I'm safe. I've got my replacement cost coverage. The only problem that Farmers has, and we've actually been successful against them, is Farmers came out with new language that not only are they taking ACV payments as their initial payment, like most carriers do, but they've added some language in for paid when incurred, PWI. And the courts came back and reviewed this and said, well, hold on a second, Farmers. You're telling the insureds that they're getting replacement cost. Then you go into the policy and you see you're not actually getting replacement cost, you're getting actual cash value. Okay, so be it. But then you're even taking away the actual cash value payment and making it paid when incurred. You have gone far too afield from a representation of replacement cost value to no, insured, you've got to spend the money and then they will maybe pay you back. It was absolutely ludicrous what happened in the case that we had, and I am always going to be continuing to fight this issue with Farmers over paid when incurred, and really any carrier for paid when incurred, because it's it really is an egregious practice. Insurance policies are not intended to be a reimbursement policy. They are an indemnity policy, and I stand by that, and I forever will. All right, taking a look a little further into the policy, we get to one more page where we've got additional information, and it gives us the mortgage company, and it gives us finally our list of the policy and endorsements. Mortgage company is really only important so that you can plan accordingly for what you're going to do when you get that check. The check's going to have the mortgage company on it for any coverage A payment. So make sure you've got a process in place to deal with that. But more importantly is this policy endorsements language contained in here. This language is where you're going to find all of the forms that are part of this policy. This section, again, I recognize that it's small, but it lists a number of documents just by name or by letter. 56-5648 First Ed, IL 09107-02. Those sound like gibberish, but those are the policy forms. So when you check a policy and say, hey, did I actually get everything? You always, always, always want to compare the forms that you received, which you can find their form edition in the bottom left corner or bottom right corner, with what you get in the declaration pages to make sure you have everything. I have found multiple cases where what the carrier gave me was not actually the forms that were listed in the declaration pages. So you need to double check that without question. All right, let's take a look at another example. State Farm, always one of my favorite carriers. State Farm, for those who know me, know that I've got more claims against State Farm at this point than any other carrier. They've overtaken Allstate and Farmers when it comes to litigation, partially because they are the largest carrier in the country, but in my opinion, because of some of the really egregious conduct that is out there that State Farm is conducting. State Farm's declarations page is a lot smaller, but it contains a lot of the same information, just in different ways, right? We see up here in the top right that we've got the policy limits that are contained within the policy. But on top of that, we've got a more localized version of what the location is. Location just says same as mailing address. Fantastic. I now know that if there's any dispute over the property that's actually covered. We've again got some loss settlement provisions regarding replacement cost, similar construction, and limited replacement cost for coverage B. Here, State Farm uses a list of names plus the form numbers to determine what forms are included in the policy. So you can see here that forms, options, and endorsements, homeowner policy, FP 7955. That was State Farm's old form. It's now 2138 and uses a similar outline for their coverages. But it tells you the other ones, that you've got increased dwelling up to 31,000, ordinance and law coverage 10%, jewelry and furs 1,500, 2,500. I know that all of these forms need to be included in the documents that I am sent, and if they are not, I will absolutely be going forward to get those because I need them. The next page of this, which is the second page of the State Farm declarations, also contains a little bit more information regarding what is actually being the mortgage company, loan numbers provided on that second page. Not terribly exciting, but again, you just need to note it for how you're going to be handling it. Next, we go into another example of State Farm giving a list of optional coverages that have not, and you can see it, whether or not you can see it, it's bold and underlined, not been added to your policy. Okay, you've got to ask yourself, why do I care about what isn't added on the policy? And the reason is you can know that there are going to be arguments that carriers will put forward based off of things that could have been bought. Easiest example out there is Erie Insurance. Erie offers an endorsement for their policy for matching of roofs and siding. Farmers, I think, actually have that on theirs as well. That endorsement usually has a limit, $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 for purposes of matching the whatever's put on versus what was there before. Okay, sounds great, right? Okay, they offer added coverage. If someone has it, fantastic. Only it's not so great because most of the limits are far too low to actually effectuate a full repair of siding and roofing in the event of something like a hail loss to the property. So you want to make sure that you're talking to your insureds about those risks. In addition, without those endorsements, there have been successful arguments that we have made that there is full replacement based off of pre-loss condition and what the property looked like before without a limit on the dollar value. So, by way of example, Erie Insurance Company has a water loss following a hail and rainstorm. Okay, roof has some partial damage. They're claiming they want to patch it. Water came into the property, damaging 2 rooms. This is an actual case that I had. Erie Insurance says we're only going to patch the roof. The water damage for the interior damage, 2 rooms, 1 wall in each room. We are going to paint all 4 walls in that room, just like every carrier does. Well, we obviously got depositions taken and cross-examination done of the witnesses and said, well, wait a second, Erie. You paid for water damage on or painting all 4 walls, right? But only one of them was damaged. You paid for the others because they all matched, right? Their response was, well, no, not because they matched. What? It was because they were continuous. Okay. They're continuous in their appearance, right? Well, yeah. They all matched, right? Well, no, I don't like that word. The panel actually almost giggled when they were answering these questions because it was such a ludicrous statement. Because what clearly happened was we said, okay, 1 wall is damaged. You paid for all the walls because that's what it looked like beforehand, and they're continuous in their matching. Now we go to the outside of the property, and we've got siding. Okay, you paid for only a few pieces of the siding to be replaced despite it not looking the same. Well, yeah. And why is that? Well, because siding can be replaced one by one. Okay, can you just paint 1 wall in a room? You can, but that's not what you paid for. You paid for all of them because that's what it looked like before. You can use their own estimates against them to show that, of course, they owe for these things. Of course, they owe to make it look like it did before the loss. You just don't like it when it costs you too much money. That's the only distinguishing factor between interior repairs and exterior repairs. And you should absolutely be using that. There's a question that I want to make sure I get up here. In your example of the underwriter, should we be labeling them on the proof of loss instead of farmer's insurance? Great question. So as we saw in the farmer's policy, truck insurance exchange is the underwriter. To the extent that you catch it, yes, name it as truck insurance exchange. It won't really play out as being a significant difference, though, when you produce the proof of loss. It doesn't change the value or the what's the word I'm looking for? It doesn't change the I'm completely blanking on the word I'm looking for here. The authority of the proof of loss. It is still just as important as it would be whether or not you had it on there as truck or farmers. All right. So moving forward. So long story short, that's why you want to know what's not offered so you can anticipate the arguments. Went a bit of a tangent there. Last but not least, for this State Farm policy, this is a following list of option coverage you have not added to your policy. It continues onto the next page for more language. Make sure that you have all of those pages when you are doing this. Those are just 2 examples of declaration pages that you can look at. Again, they're all different, but make sure you know what you're looking for when you actually look into these policies. Now, there's a number of other policy pages that you probably don't read. I would bet dollars to donuts that everyone that is on this right now has maybe once or twice looked at the table of contents, if ever. And I bet none of you look at it regularly. Well, you should be. The table of contents can be a fantastic trigger to ideas on coverage that you might not remember every time. So you should be reviewing that table of contents and looking at things like permissions granted to you for the Allstate policy or for the Erie policy that gives them permission to leave properties vacant. General conditions and agreements made with you. Again, this has language that you can use against the carrier as to, hey, this is what you're promising to do when you are granting this policy to my insured. So make sure you realize that as the overarching coverage that is in this. The definition section. I bet there's a lot of you that haven't recently read the definitions section of the policy. Oh, great question. Follow up from Ashley as to the underwriting and who's underwriting the policy versus it being marketed as a farmer's. Is it the same when it comes to letters of rep or your contract? The answer is yes. The contract and the letter of rep, you're going to be fine if you say farmers or if you say truck insurance exchange, because it's the intent of the party that goes, the intent of the parties, i.e., you and the insured, for what you're signing up for, and for the letter of rep, they're going to know. That's not going to hold anything up when it comes to the issues of what you're asking for in the letter of rep. For example, a copy of the policy. So, point being, all of these sections, you want to read all of them. RTFP, read the F in policy. Let's take a look at an example from Allstate. The table of contents is extensive, but it contains all of the sections that you might not realize are in a policy and you can use it against them. For example, like I said before, permissions granted to you. I would bet most people on this, short of listening to my other webinars, don't know that there is a section of the Allstate policy called permissions granted to you. And that section says you, as the insured, have permission to leave the property vacant and unoccupied for as long as you want. Yeah, you can leave it vacant and unoccupied for as long as you want. And as so long as it doesn't conflict with what the any other limits within the policy for things like vandalism, right? A lot of policies say if it's vacant or unoccupied for more than 30 days, you're not covered for vandalism. Short of that happening, you've still got coverage on your policy. Well, that's awesome. And it's awesome for a lot of reasons. Let's say you decide to move to a different house and you leave the property vacant and unoccupied for 3 years and a water loss happens. There's no restriction within the policy as to a vacancy or unoccupancy for a time limit for water damage. And they're going to come back and say, well, you didn't reside there. Well, screw you, Allstate. You told me I didn't have to. You said I'm allowed to leave this vacant and unoccupied. That means the place is empty. No stuff is in there. No people are there. The place is empty. It clearly couldn't be my residence premises, but you told me it doesn't have to be. That is incredibly valuable information, and you might only get that by reading that table of contents to remind yourself that it's in that actual policy. So it gives you all of these general sections, a ton more information that you should be considering and reviewing, including all of your optional coverages that you may or may not have added to the policy. All right, taking a little deeper dive into some of the policy language that's in those sections. This class, again, is talking about these introductory sections of the policy because it contains so much that is overlooked and ignored by too many people in this industry. On this first page here, we've got some really important stuff. And the first in the top left is that this is an agreement between the parties, right? We make the following agreements with you. And recognizing that and using that as persuasive language in your argument letters can be useful. But like most policies, this defines the dwelling. And a dwelling is defined as the single building structure identified as the insured property on the policy declaration where you reside and which is principally used as a private residence. Again, we now know that there's conflicting language within this policy so that when when Allstate points to this, hold on, Allstate, that's not entirely accurate. To actually get to this, the dwelling, there's different definitions for insured premises, residence premises. All of these are definitions that you can use when trying to fight some of these issues with Allstate. This page has a ton of stuff on it, right? It's got our definition for residence premises, so be it, but it's got some other really great definitions that we can use against them when we need to. A lot of people might not realize that Allstate has an actual definition for a windstorm, right? It means wind with or without precipitation. Fantastic. If you get into an argument as to whether or not the damage is caused by windstorm, you can say, well, look, the wind might have caused something else to happen, but the wind wasn't what damaged my property. It's the tree that fell into it. It also gives you the insuring agreement that it says, in reliance on the information you have given us, we agree to provide the coverages indicated on the policy declaration. In return, you must pay the premium when due and comply with the policy terms and conditions and inform us of any change in title, use, or occupancy at the residence premises. Fine, no problem. I understand those terms. But what's so valuable about this is not every policy has it. So we've had policy arguments where you said, sure, we have changed the use and occupancy of a property because the person died. So be it. It was still a homeowner. It was still the home of the daughter that was living there. And your policy never tells us that we need to change that. It's really valuable to have that information. Did you know that there's provisions in almost every single policy that says it must conform with the state statutes? So if you have language from a statute like the Unfair Claims Practice Act or Unfair Insurance Practices Act, you can say to the carrier, your policy language isn't accurate because it conflicts with what's in there, and that's what is guided and controlling here. There's also a thing for coverage changes. And again, this is in almost every policy that's out there. It says if we are going to broaden coverage, if we're going to give more coverage to everybody with a new policy endorsement, let's say, that actually it gets effectuated immediately versus changes that reduce coverage that you've got to approve. We're going to wait until there's a renewal for that to happen. All of this type of language can be really valuable when you put it all together with general knowledge of, well, what's Allstate been doing? Has there been other changes that this policy doesn't reflect? One other one I wanted to point out here in the bottom right is the policy transfer. And it says that you may not transfer this policy to another person without our written consent. This comes up in some arguments over assignment of benefits. There's been a big push in the industry recently for assignment of benefits for whether it be contractors, candidly, even some public adjusters. So this language applies to the policy before a loss occurs. Almost every state has come down and said that once a loss occurs, you're not assigning the policy to someone, you're actually assigning benefits that are already owed, and you're allowed to do that. So just know that this isn't necessarily a restriction on the AOBs that may or may not be out there, regardless of how you may or may not feel about it, because I do recognize there is quite a dispute as to AOBs. This is a section for continued coverage after your death. If you die, you being the insured, the coverage will continue to your legal representative, but only for a limited amount of time. Most policies will have some restriction as to how long a policy will stay in effect after somebody dies. So make sure you know and review that policy language so that you understand how long this will actually continue. So for this policy, although it's the red covers it, it's either until the sale of the residence, until the policy renews, or I think it's 180 days, but it's blacked out. I'm pretty sure that it's for 180 days, whichever one comes first. So again, really important for those unique cases where someone might have passed away as a result. Allstate doesn't stop there. As with most carriers, it goes on for quite some time, and they have an arbitration provision. Now, I only wanted to highlight the arbitration provision because of what has happened in a number of other states, specifically all you lovely people from Florida who are watching this. Arbitration provisions under new law are actually becoming a requirement under policies rather than an option. In this Allstate policy, as it was always the case for the longest time, arbitration had to be agreed to by both parties. You couldn't force an arbitration. Well, Florida has changed that game. Florida, as many of you know, has come down with some new regulations and statutes that have really, really hurt property owners. It's horrible what they're doing to property owners down there, simply as the result of some bad actors. But the fact of the matter is, it is hurting the consumer. And I think that's going to come to light much clearer after the next hurricane hits. But for now, that's what we're dealing with. So know that provision can be put into the policies regarding required arbitration, and make sure you speak to an attorney about how to deal with that moving forward. I was just reading one of the comments here. For coverages that are being added to the policy without a premium increase, you get it immediately. So a claim filed on the previous policy period, it may still include coverages from this period. Again, that's talking about that broadening of coverage, realizing that there's not actually a question there, but I very much appreciate that from Matt. Moving on, we got a few more policy examples to get through here, and I'm going way too slow. So I'm not going to spend as much time on this traveler's example, other than to recognize that there are differences. Make sure that you recognize that all of these policies have significant differences when it comes to how they are written. Um, for example, this traveler's policy has a definition for actual cash value contained in their definitions section. Allstate didn't have that. So you want to make sure you see that when you're reviewing these for what they're trying to do with their payment provisions under these policies. Um, they also have definitions for things like fungus. I was only pointing that out to note that it didn't include viruses for a lot of the COVID litigation, for those of us that have actually been successful doing them versus, a lot of those personal injury attorneys who caused problems for everybody in the industry. The policy also defines property damage. Matt'll like this. Property damage contained in the farmer's policy is ridiculously broad. And all it says for there to be property damage means physical injury to, destruction of, or loss of use of tangible property. That's it. Physical injury doesn't mean it has to no longer do its job. This is huge for hail cases, right? What does it mean for a shingle roof to have hail damage? Well, it just needs to have some level of injury to it, right? It has to have changed. It's like getting a scratch on my arm. I've been injured. There's a scratch on my arm. Can you still use your arm? Of course I can still use my arm. Doesn't mean I wasn't injured. It's no different when it comes to defining property damage. Carriers like to try to say, well, when we talk about property damage, we're talking about things other people are doing to you. This is the liability section that this matters. Well, screw that. That's not true. There's nothing in here that indicates that. It's just saying what does property damage, what does it constitute under this policy? And it's just physical injury. It just means there's been some change to that item that wasn't there before, and that is enough. So I beat you to it. It doesn't only apply to the liability. If you are using that concept of what is property damage when it comes to litigating the case or arguing it, just because the policy uses the phrase in the liability section, which it does, and I'll wholly admit that, doesn't mean that it doesn't also constitute a colloquial definition that we can use when arguing expectations of the insureds under these policies. Is it the same as direct physical loss? Great question. Is property damage the same as direct physical loss? I could argue both ways, to be perfectly honest with you, but I'm going to tell you whatever's broadest is what I'm going to make my arguments when the time comes for these policies. All right. I want to keep moving because I do want to get through there was a lot of questions that came in through the emails, but this is really important. And I get this. The number of letters that I have seen from carriers that mix this issue up is wild. It's not the issue of all risk versus named peril. It's the issue that not all risk policies are the same, and the language is not the same across them. Generally, under most HO policies, homeowner policies, you will have either named peril or all risk. And you can take a look at the coverage sections that determine that, but this is really important. The coverages are deeper into the policy. It's not in this initial section. It's way past your definitions, your additional coverages, the what is covered items of the policy, and you can get different examples. Here's the Allstate language, and for some reason, and I have taught this through like 5 or 6 different classes. For some reason, everybody still has it locked in their head that to have a covered loss, you must have sudden and accidental direct physical loss. That's the amazing phrase that is locked into this industry as to what is a covered loss. I cannot stress enough. I want to yell at you right now. Not all policies require sudden and accidental direct physical loss. Get the phrase out of your head. Most policies don't require sudden and accidental direct physical loss. So that concept of sudden, of I need an event, I need something to have happened to have coverage, is not accurate. You have no burden, zero, to prove an event that caused the damage. Perfect example are hail claims. You go up on your roof, you see hail damage up there. Fantastic. You call your carrier and say, I've got hail damage to my roof. If the carrier comes back and says, well, tell me what storm caused that damage, tell them to go pound sand. You don't have to do that. It is not part of your responsibility to do it. You are claiming damage. They have to prove it isn't covered under most policies. I see letters from insurance companies, from State Farm, from farmers. They come back and say, there's been no evidence of sudden and accidental direct physical loss. Your policy doesn't require that. Let's take a look at a few others. State Farm. We pay for accidental direct physical loss to the property described in coverage A unless the loss is excluded. State Farm, where's the word sudden? Where is it? It's not in there. And unless you're telling me that my client did this on purpose, I have clearly met that it's accidental, and we all know that there's actually damage to the property. Here's Nationwide. We are covered for accidental direct physical loss. Great, just like State Farm. The word sudden isn't in there. How about Travelers? We insure against the risk of direct physical loss to the property. Now we're not even talking about accidental anymore. We're talking about just direct physical loss. Period. End of story. Get that phrase, sudden and accidental, out of your head. All right. So a few of the questions, because I was going on my rant for a little bit. Do you plan to do webinars more focused on commercial policies rather than residential? Absolutely. So this series for the first 8 parts is the residential, and then we're moving into the commercial and business policies, the BOP policies, and the CP policies after that. Matt's got some comments in here about vandalism not being accidental. Absolutely, but accidental is defined as accidental for the insured, not accidental for the loss itself. The conflict, courts have come down and indicated that that conflict is really a non-conflict because it's a named coverage. Accidentally had a hurricane. That's funny. All right, so point being from all this, get that freaking language of sudden and accidental out of your heads. That is not what is necessary. Read your policies. Named peril is very similar with all the starting language. Most carriers have that same exact starting language. They just add a tag onto the end that makes it named perils. So for example, State Auto, we insure for direct physical loss to the property covered caused by a peril listed below unless the loss is excluded in the general exclusions. So we can see here that it's part of there's a list that will come after this that covers it. All right. This was supposed to be later on. The plug for Mapia must not have moved it, but that's okay. I guess that was the end. I thought I had one other section. If you are not part of a local organization, join one. There are a ton of local organizations across the country that focus in your specific area. If you're up in the Northeast and you're part of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, you should be joining Mapia. Mapia is the Mid-Atlantic Association of Public Insurance Adjusters, and these organizations are really valuable. Not only do they provide CE credits, but we pay for lobbyists to make sure that the laws are watched over, to make sure that the insurance companies aren't putting BS regulations into the law that are going to hurt everybody. So join those. There are also great national organizations that do the same thing, but on a larger scale. APIA, for example, is the American Association of Public Insurance Adjusters that has been integral in doing things like making sure Kentucky didn't have a 2.5% fee cap on residential claims under $25,000. You know, doing things like that is great for everybody in this entire country because what one state does, other states will look to. So join an organization. I want to go through the questions, and I'm going to try and do them quickly since we are running low on time, but there were a lot of them. If you've got more questions, please, please, please put them in the side. I will be happy to address them. There is a question now, not residential, but have dealt with Chubb's windstorm and hail deductibles that use tier 1 or tier 2 counties. I don't know what I have dealt with it. If the only question is have I dealt with it, the answer is yes. Chubb policies are somewhat unique in how they have different deductibles based off of different criteria. To the extent you have more questions on that, let me know. So how do you know when an endorsement is included or not with the policy? Hopefully you got that, but I wanted it to be the first question because I wanted to hit it again. You want to look at that list of endorsements and forms on the declarations page. That is how you will know. There are a number of carriers, a lot of them actually, who will include language within their policy that says, you know, go back and check your deck page to see if this is included. That's what they're talking about. You're going to go back and look at the forms to make sure that that language is actually included because they just put it as part of their general form. make sure you are looking there. What can a PA do when there's an ambiguity? There's another question that's coming up later about unauthorized practice of law. There's always these questions of where's the line? How much can I really do as the public adjuster? You can do a hell of a lot. I mean, short of telling the insurance company they are violating statutes, laws, or case law, you can point out case law. You can make them aware of it. You can even argue based off of what you've learned based off of that case law or webinars like this. So when there's an ambiguity, what I would tell you is use the language against them and make them answer questions. There is a reason that lawyers ask questions the way they do when they're in a trial. Questions help get everybody on the same page and lead the person who's answering it to think the way you're thinking. So if you've got an ambiguity in the policy, use questions to force them into an answer that proves the ambiguity. My favorite example, my favorite ambiguity in all of insurance policies, and anyone who knows me knows what I'm going to say, State Farm's period of time. The State Farm policy says we do not cover leaks that occur over a period of time. Thanks, State Farm. What the fuck does that mean? A period of time is 5 seconds. Clearly, that meets the definition of a period of time. Well, you cover a leak that has happened for 5 seconds. You've covered a leak that occurred for 3 weeks. Where do you draw the line? And how do I, as the insured, know what that line is? I can't know. It's physically impossible for me to know what that line is. And as a result, it is ambiguous. Use questions to prove that to them. Just because the comments there are a number of them. If you've got an actual question, make sure you put a question mark on it and I will throw it up there. Otherwise, I'm going to assume you guys are talking amongst yourselves, which I'm all for. How do you handle coverages that are, and I apologize that this is cut off, denied, then added back into the policy, and then there's sublimits as to relate to those when it comes to water damage? Look, policies are confusing. There are a number of times where coverage is taken out through an exclusion and then added back in somewhere else. Really easy example that most people are familiar with are collapse claims. Collapse is generally an exclusion under almost every single insurance policy. But similarly, almost every single insurance policy has added coverage for certain types of collapse. And you need to make sure you get an understanding of how those play together. And understanding the exclusion and the add back really comes down to what grants the most possible coverage. If you have an ambiguity that is created because of takeaways and add backs, you always go in favor of the coverage, of having the coverage within the policy. So make sure that you have that understanding going into this. If the deck page shows there is ordinance and law coverage, but the carrier says they are not going to provide it because the county is not enforcing any building codes, what do you do? There's 2 really great things you can do with this, because this comes up all the time. And again, I know there's a lot of questions about O&L, and given your responses, I should do a class on it. The number one thing you should do is send them one question. Do you only have to go the speed limit on the road when there's a cop with a radar gun? That's the first question. Because the answer is obviously no, you always have to drive the speed limit. The question isn't whether or not it's being enforced at that exact moment. The question is, what does the law tell me I have to do? The law is not dictated, and this is really important, is not dictated by those who enforce it or do not enforce it. That would be such a ridiculous standard for any court to ever adhere to. And no court has ever said that. There's not one court that I'm aware of, and I would certainly like to know if it exists. No court has ever come down and said, oh, you only have to follow the law if somebody is telling you to follow that law. That sounds absurd. And if you have a conversation with anybody at an insurance company, they should recognize how absurd that sounds. Now, you and I both know they probably won't always recognize how absurd that is. So the next thing you should do is call the code enforcement official. And you should pose a question, not whether or not actually ask for permission to do it in your case, but just pose a question. If I have a property owner who's anticipating doing X thing, do they have to follow the codes and the ordinance and codes of whether it be county, township, state, whatever it may be? Do they have to follow those? Just keep it broad. You don't have to ask for the specifics. And of course, they are going to say, yes, they must follow the codes that are regulating the area. So get that in writing and send that to the carrier saying, hey, carrier, they said I've got to follow the codes. Here's the code. Give me my coverage. I'm excited to read through all these comments. All right. Did I miss one? How would I would like to know how to clearly identify code coverage on a policy. I think this is my last code question. 2 places to look. Number 1, you'll take a look at the declarations pages to make sure that you've got the code coverage added to the policy. Next, you've got to check the base forms to see if it's added in somewhere in there and read that actual coverage. That will give you your base understanding of whether or not it is in there. To go beyond that, I'm going to have to go into the whole class because that's a long story of how to deal with these ordinance and law issues. Can we get some case law to force carriers to meet their obligations? Abso-fucking-lutely. And I will be happy to provide that to you. These webinars are general when it comes to any state. I use some state examples, but I specifically leave it general because there has been more of a national audience for it, especially on the rewatches. So to the extent you want case law, give me a call. If it's a state that I practice in, I've probably got very quick access to it. If it's a state I don't practice in, I can probably still find it. I'm just going to send you one of those disclaimers that says, hey, I'm not licensed to practice here, so don't take any of this as legal advice, but here's case law that may or may not help you. What are the duties of the insurer to provide the full policy when requested in writing? I would wager that almost everybody that is on this call has requested a policy from the carrier and you have not gotten it. It happens constantly. I've given some tricks in the past. I'll give you the quick rundown of what you should do. Number 1, get your client to get it from the website. They can go on allstate.com, State Farm, whatever the hell the website's called. Create an account for them if they don't have one. If you've got the deck page, you can create an account. Create the account and download the policy documents. Easiest way by far to get this, and you can get it from day 1. If you can't, your next step is to, in your letter of rep, make a request for the policy. Here's a trick that I learned actually at our last PAGPS conference. Again, you should register for it. The biggest hurdle for carriers is when you ask for a certified copy. I know it sounds more official and you want the official copy. You don't need it to be certified. Just ask for a copy of the policy and you can get it a hell of a lot faster than if you ask for it to be certified. There's a lot of red tape when it comes to certification. And because of the tricks I just taught you about confirming the forms, you can know, do I actually have all of the proper forms, because you've got a comparison to the deck page. Third, go through the agent. But again, a lot of agents aren't that smart. So make sure you're getting the full policy and not just the renewal package. Any tips to finding policy and endorsements online when Google isn't very helpful? For those of you who don't know, when you are looking and not getting a policy from a carrier, you can look on Google to find the forms. For example, if you go on Google right now and type in the State Farm policy 2340 or 7955 or 2138, if you type in the form number in the proper form and just search for that, you will very often find the form. It might take you a few clicks, but it is there. And again, as long as you know that this is the right form number with my deck page, you know that this is the form that goes with the client. You don't have to have State Farm to tell you that, because that is the form number. The form number is always going to be the same. If you really, really have hard times and need to get a policy, there is another option, and it's the SURF network. SERFF. For those of you who don't know what SURF is, it is a ridiculously poorly organized website, but it is where every single insurance company in the country goes to upload their forms for approval with their department. Those forms have to be approved, and they can all be found on that SURF network. I'm telling you right now, it is very, very difficult to navigate quickly to find the forms, but they are on there. If you ever want to talk to me about how to do it, I've gotten pretty good at navigating the SURF network just as a result of what I do. And I'm happy to talk to you about that, but it's a nightmare to try and find a form. There's actually an entire organization with the NAIC where they're trying to make that SURF network better because of how bad it is to navigate. And I told them when I was there last time at their meeting, The only thing you need to do is make it searchable based off the form number and the carrier. This is a no-brainer. I don't know why at AIC you insist on using your own form numbers and not the form number used by the carrier, but just make it searchable by this form number. Hopefully that is a change that will come soon. What do you do about small print with asterisks on deck pages, which modify coverage in the event of a total loss, removal of coverage B and D, rejecting VPL claims? Okay, this was a lot for a question. I wanted to put it in here because I don't know what situation you're talking about. There certainly are scenarios where states require payments to be made under the VPL, but it's I don't know of a situation where they're trying to take that away. So VPL, just so everyone understands, value property law, it in essence requires carriers to cover that full value of that property in the event of a total loss. It's not used everywhere, but where it is used, it's pretty great to have. It's almost like a guaranteed replacement cost coverage. And they're saying that there's a situation where that gets removed. If whoever asked this question is on the call, ask me for more specifics, and I'll be happy to provide it if I can. This one was really clever. I'm not going to read it, the whole thing. I'll let you read it. It was a really clever idea that I don't think would ever actually work. The concept that the policy itself is a content, it is something you've purchased, it's an item that you own, but it's not actually true. You're paying for the agreement, not for the physical paper itself. The agreement is what's controlling. I don't think it would actually fly as an argument, but I love the cleverness or the attempt at the cleverness that this brings. So keep bringing them on. How do you calculate deductibles on commercial policies with multiple buildings and or locations? Awesome question. I really like this one because it does come up often. Most commercial policies will have a per building deductible. So if you've got 15 buildings on a campus, for example, they'll say that there is a deductible unique to each building. In the event that the policy isn't clear about that, and that does happen, you've got to find the language that gives you the broadest amount of coverage possible. So if the carrier wasn't clear about a per building deductible, you're going to get it per loss. And if that loss happens to hit multiple buildings, it provides more coverage. Any ambiguity, again, goes in your favor. It's really more of a specifics question on your loss, though. So if that's you, give me a call. Let me know. I'm happy to discuss. If the dwelling portion of the claim is in appraisal, but the settlement has been accepted, I'm going to put this in my own terms. Claim goes to appraisal, but there's already an undisputed amount. Client gets ACV, and they start doing the work. Can they get the depreciation while it's still in appraisal? And the answer is absolutely yes. There is no language whatsoever in the policy that indicates that they can withhold that depreciation simply because the claim went to appraisal. And you need to challenge the insurance company to point you to that language if they try to do that. If a carrier comes back and says, oh, we're waiting on any depreciation as a result, any depreciation payments because it's in appraisal, say, screw you. You've got a loss payment provision that says how you pay for a loss. It's contained in every single policy. And it says when I do my work and I provide you the proof of that work and the payments that are associated with it, you're going to owe me that depreciation back. Zero language in this policy says that that is negated or canceled or doesn't apply because of appraisal. So give me my money. So you absolutely should be able to get that. Pros and cons of home warranty versus homeowners insurance. They cover two different things. Home warranties, although a lot of them are a scam, and I want everyone to be very careful about getting home warranties. Home warranty companies are worse than insurance companies. They want to hold more funds, and they make it a nightmare to get payment. I know this both from personal experience and as a lawyer. But home warranty concept, it will cover the things that wear and tear under your home that the policy won't. Your pipes break, cause a water leak, and they're worn and torn. The home warranty can cover the pipes. Your hot water heater that breaks from wear and tear, covered. Wear and tear to your dishwasher, covered. Generally speaking, read your warranty. But just know that that's the kind of extent to it. It's not going to be the resulting damages under most home warranties. Given the recent earthquake activity in the metro New York area, are there any updates we should be aware of on endorsement issues? Yes, earthquake is generally going to fall under a lot of the earth movement provisions, and there's actual specific exclusions for earthquake under a lot of policies. So you want to make sure you're reviewing those policies for those potential exclusions and any add backs from endorsements that may be appropriate under the policy. This is definitely more of a per policy review type thing. So if you're not sure if the damage is going to be covered under the policy, let me know. I'll be happy to talk to you about it as well. Rounding it down now, last few slides. Public adjusters and documenting the claim. What is crossing the line into UPL and what do attorneys like to see? UPL, unauthorized practice of law, is when you are doing the job of the attorney, right? You are practicing law. Generally, this means you can't tell a carrier that they are breaking the law, right? You cannot tell the carrier that they are violating the Unfair Claims Practice Act. You can't tell a carrier that they are acting in bad faith. What you can tell a carrier is, hey, here is the Unfair Claims Practice Act. I'm giving you the language. Perfectly fine. You can then tell them, hey, the language says you're supposed to respond within 25 days. Great. I sent you 10 days, really. I sent you a letter 25 days ago and you haven't responded. In that paragraph, you never said, carrier, you're violating the Unfair Claims Practice Act, but you've certainly implied it. And that's okay. You're allowed to do that all day long. If your state has something else specific, make sure you talk to an attorney in your state, but generally you will be fine so long as you aren't trying to interpret the law and tell the carrier that they are in violation of it. That combination is a big no-no. As for what we like to see, the more documentation, the better. A good claims log on your end is incredibly valuable. Photographs, letters, emails, that's what we really want to see when we're looking at these losses. Oh, someone said congratulations on being a new daddy. Yes, I'm going to post a photo of my children. For those who don't know, just had a new daughter and super excited about it. He looks so fucking adorable. How could I not put it on here? So needed to do that. All right. Thank you, everybody. I ran a little bit over and hopefully it was still valuable for you. We've got 7 more that we're going to do in this series. I'm going to keep breaking down these policies so that you guys can hopefully walk away thinking, all right, I've got a great base of knowledge for understanding the policies. If you've got any questions, here's my information one last time. I'm happy to answer and do whatever I can to assist in these claims. If you hit a wall and you need me to step in, please, I'm happy to help. One thing I will tell you, if you don't use me, that's fine. These are free marketing that I do for my office, but just make sure you use an attorney who actually knows this industry. Don't let your clients go to their divorce lawyer or their personal injury lawyer. Use someone who actually knows the industry. It makes a huge, huge difference. And it helps prevent bad law. Some of the worst law that's ever come out in this industry is the result of people doing it that don't know what they're doing. So I would just make a plea that you use people who know what they're doing when it comes to the law. Hopefully I see you next time on here, and thank you so much. All right, everybody, take care.